we're going to get started. And when you ask questions at the end, whoever takes the mic to respond to it is going to rephrase your questions so that it'll be captured for posterity. We don't have a camera person here, but we can say the question again, okay? So Freda Smith's going to introduce herself, and put on your seatbelts because you're in for a good ride.
Oh, how daunting, how daunting. My name is Freda Smith. I am a member of the Universal Fellowship of Metropolitan Community Churches, and I'm absolutely honored to be in this panel with these really, really, really wonderful sisters who have such wonderful stories to tell and how they overcame in the churches where they were. But I'd like to start on kind of a low note. The church that I first was called into the ministry, the church that I looked for and I said, yes, God, I'll give you my life, and I brought my little tender, beating heart life up to there, happened to be the Salvation Army. And up until very, very recently, there was it's an international body. It's much stronger in the United Kingdom, in Canada, in Australia. And it's got strong women, lots of strong women. The Canadian church and the United States church both were formed by lassies who came over here and started the Salvation Army. But to this day, I could not be a member of the Salvation Army. I have not broken any glass ceiling. Until very, very recently, it was for the International Salvation Army around the world. No homosexual shall ever wear the uniform of the Salvation Army. Now they've let up just a little. Just a little bit. You have to be celibate unless you're married to a member of the opposite sex. That's all they ask. Other than that, anything goes. So, so anyway, I haven't broken my traditional, my heart religion, my to save and to serve, the last, the least, to believe, to be proud to stand on the street with a drum and just say the name of Jesus Christ and invite everyone to come, except unless you're sort of that way, and then you're going to get your heart broken if you go there. So I'm going to pass this on down to people.
What are you passionate about now, Freda?
What am I passionate about now? The same thing. I mean, the same thing. I am so happy here. I am so impressed. Can you believe it? Years ago, when I was at a district conference and I preached, and we were just, I mean, everything was against us on all sides, and I stood up and I said, you know, we're so fortunate. We are so fortunate. People in the future are going to absolutely envy us because we were able to live in this time. We were able to live when miracles happened, when the mountains fell, when the world was changed. And so I'm very, very grateful that I was there. I'm very, very grateful that we took on the giants, the sexism, the racism, and all of the isms. I am just blessed. So we're going to go on around. I'm not going to take too long because, you know, the stories here. Wait until you hear these stories.
My name is Jan Griesinger, age 75, grew up,
Age 82.
and yes, one of my big projects is ageism, so yes, we have to say how proudly we are old, yes.
So too old, so late smart.
I grew up in Barrington, Illinois, a very white privileged suburb of Chicago. So yes, grew up with white privilege and class privilege. First action I think I was part of was 1963 in college after the 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed in Birmingham. We had a rally there. Then, yes, involved against the Vietnam War. Yes, helped found something in 1969, Dayton Women's Liberation. And yes, of course, it was also called Women's Lib. And yes, for many years I got to work at United Campus Ministry at Ohio University. And yes, the white privileged job in which, yes, I could choose to be involved in activist things and, yes, work with students to get them to be activists, involved in the United Church of Christ Coalition, 1984 to 1997. Been involved since 2004 in Old Lesbians Organizing for Change. And yes, I brought some of our newsletters back here, so if you know any old lesbians, bring them a newsletter. And no, I'm not a fan of the only answer to every question. Just go to the website, just go to the website. No, in the country where there hasn't been high-speed internet, that's not the best answer, no. And yes, our Old Lesbians Organizing for Change, having our national gathering in 2 years in Columbus, Ohio. Yes, I think that some of the best things that, yes, I've gotten to be involved in Dayton, there was something called the Professional Golfers Association tournament in 1969. And yes, it had been a big issue locally. Is this going to generate money for the African American part of Dayton? So no, we had a protest of South African white golfers. We sat on the green. We threw balls out to mess with the, putting. And yes, got arrested, of course. Yes, lucky to be involved in many other things. To stop violence against women, to start a battered women's shelter. But yes, I think one big thing now is to end Citizens United, because we have the best government money can buy. Until we get rid of the system, we're going to get nothing. We're not going to get anything. So, yes.
Wow. Well, I'm Carter Heyward. I'm 72, and wow, I love listening to you all and to the panel earlier, really helping locate us in history. I feel sure that the reason I got invited to be on this panel is because I am so profoundly disturbed about the misogyny that currently is racking our society, among which our churches stand. The churches are not untouched by that, and as with racism, sexism, and misogyny are on the move and without much opposition in many of our state houses and certainly in our national government. And I fear in our churches as well. So I have many passions, but right at the center of my passion, I hope till the day I die, will always be the well-being of women of all races, all classes, all cultures, and religion. Those of us who were among the early second-wave feminists back in the 70s, too often were white women who were oblivious to our sisters of color and to sisters of other cultures. I believe that has changed for the better. I hope it has over the decades, but that's still something that we who are white need to be aware of. In my own case, I was born in North Carolina in 1945, white, middle class, inquisitive, sort of big-hearted, open-minded little girl, baffled by what I knew. We didn't name it racism, but by what was going on between white people and colored people, using the language of the day, asking questions about that and not getting answers that made any sense to me. When I was a junior in high school, I was the president of the North Carolina Young Churchmen, and my first ecclesiastical battle was with the Bishop of North Carolina at that time, because the diocesan youth camp was not integrated. And so the youth commission had to do battle with the bishop. We lost that particular battle. The youth commission was disbanded because of us. We continued to meet in one another's homes. This was in 1962. And 9 years later, that same bishop turned me down for ordination and said it was because I had an authority problem. This is a label I have enjoyed wearing. And then came the Philadelphia ordination. And I'll probably spend the next 2 minutes talking about that, and then my time will be up. That's what I have, is 2 minutes. In 1974, 11 of us who were ordained by 3 brave bishops and thousands of lay people and priests to the priesthood of the Episcopal Church 2 years before women's ordination had been authorized. And that's a story in itself. Books have been written about it. It was a most marvelous experience for the 11 of us because we had each other. Any one of us could have been picked off and forgotten, and we had each other. We had the media. I want to say a good word for the media. Media is getting some bad stuff, as we know these days, from he who will not be named. But the media helped save the day too, because they took pictures and nobody could deny it had happened. And there was efforts to deny that it had happened, to say there was no ordination that took place, but there was an ordination that took place. We had each other. We stayed in solidarity with each other over the many years. It's been 45 years since that happened, 43 years, whatever. There are 7 of us who are still walking on this earth, and we're still in solidarity with each other, not letting good girls get played off against bad girls. One thing pertaining very much to sexuality is that all of us were immediately called dykes by the people who were opposing us. To that we learned to say thank you. 3 of us were dykes. The ones who were not, the other 8, said thank you. Nobody ever denied it. Nobody ever let themselves get played off as the straight good ones versus those bad, evil, man-hating dykes. So my time is up, I believe, but we probably will talk more about this later.
It's interesting that we have to take the microphone behind ourselves. You all don't see what happens back there. My name is Aaron Swenson, and I'm really dizzy with pride at sitting with these women. For most of my life, it would have been something I would have never guessed that I would have done, ever. I was born, I'm 70 years old, moving on down to those of us who are young at this end. Yes, the young side, yes. I was born in 1947, and I was a shy, kind of withdrawn little boy. I was fairly happy. I was happy with wandering in the woods and being myself. And until I reached the age of 10, things were going pretty well. It was at 10 years old that I realized that something that had been stirring within me for a long time had something to do with the fact that I wanted to grow up to be a woman. And I knew that I was on a different trajectory than that. And this was in Atlanta in the late 1950s, and I was fortunately smart enough to know not to say anything to anybody. And so the quality of my life took on a kind of a lonely overcast, with the exception that I became very active in the local Presbyterian church, where they preached that God knows me all the way to the marrow of my bones, all of my secrets are known, and God loves me, embraces all that's in me. And I was smart enough to know, tell me how that applies to me. We didn't even have the word transgender stuff. I had no word for me. There wasn't any at the time. All I knew was that no one had ever thought of this before. I was the first one, and somehow I had managed to plumb the depths of human depravity somewhere, which is a big load for a 10-year-old. I managed through adolescence. The church became my haven, and they encouraged me, and I developed leadership skills there, and I was nurtured. I understood what it meant to be loved. I didn't understand what it meant to love myself. That was a different question for me. But I managed through life pretty well. I got married to a fabulous woman named Sigrid, who was the mother of our 2 fabulous daughters, the younger of which was premature, and as a result suffered several very severe challenges that she continues to carry with her in life. She uses a power wheelchair to get around, and she can't quite make change for $1, although she's 41 years old, and things like that. But Laura is a super spirit. I only have 2 minutes left. Oh my gosh. Okay. Fast story. I got ordained and managed to make a ministry as a pastoral counselor in Atlanta, enjoying the success of being a kind of a high-earning pastoral counselor, enjoying the privileges of being male and white and Presbyterian, and that all worked for me until I reached my mid-40s, and depression that had marked my life since I was in my 20s began to worsen so much that I couldn't deal with it. And I finally had to come out to myself. I finally had to admit to me who I was and begin to trust the world to understand who I was. And my ordination was a problem because our family's insurance, we have 1 minute, let's do this. We had 1 minute to to deal with insurance. Insurance was important because of my daughter. I could not, and my insurance was tied to my ordination. And so, we talk about courage. And what I wanted, the thing here is, for me, is courage and that grows from encouragement and community. I didn't know that. And so I tried to get through all that by myself. I could not let my daughter lose her insurance coverage, so I could not let go of my ordination. So anyone who thinks that I courageously confronted the Presbyterian Church with my gender identity issues is dead wrong. I was totally scared to death because I was doing what I needed to do. And in the process, newspaper articles came out, and my life became a public thing. And a woman consented to have breakfast with me one day at the Majestic in Atlanta. Some of you might be blessed enough to have been there. It's a greasy spoon on Ponce de Leon. And she was 67 years old, which was old for me then. And she was transsexual. She had come through the very earliest stages of the gender identity clinic at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. Had been married. Her husband never knew that she was transgender, which is the old style. And he had died, and she moved into a retirement home and become active in this big Presbyterian church right next to the retirement home. Became kind of the on-call musician for just about everything. And told me how wonderful this church community had been. And so I reached across the thing and I said, how wonderful to meet a fellow transgender Presbyterian. And she said, her face just darkened, and she said, but I'm not a Presbyterian. I said, well, why? You just told me that this Presbyterian church was like your home. Why are you not a Presbyterian? She said, I'm not a Presbyterian because I didn't think I was supposed to join the church. you know because of who I am. She said, that's why when I saw a newspaper article about a Presbyterian minister who was like me, I had to meet you. And I realized that I had met Jesus, and Jesus was an old transsexual woman at a greasy spoon on Ponce de Leon. And from there, I learned that there was a community around me that was incredible. Included people like Michael Adey and Chris Glosser and Marty Reitmeyer, and I discovered that I was not alone, and I became courageous. And so that's my story. I'll stick to it.
I'm Darlene Garner. I'm 69. I am the mother of 4, grandmother of 7, great-grandmother of 6. I have been part of MCC, Metropolitan Community Churches, for 41 years. I was raised in the National Baptist Church in Columbus, Ohio. A bastion at that time. I was born in 1948. A bastion of Northern Southernism. I was born black and have been all my life. Working class. Grew up under Jim Crow. Even when Jim Crow was dismantled, it wasn't destroyed. I think I was picked for this panel because I now recognize myself as a truth speaker and as one who can see the invisible. Kind of my story for this purpose began in the late 60s. I graduated from high school in 66. In June, I was married in December of 66, had my first child in 67, and then one in 69 and one in 71. And then my husband at the time told me that I made a better man than he was, and I set about to prove it. So that was a significant moment in my coming out and coming into the fullness of who I am. In 1973, I chose to move from Columbus, Ohio, because I could not find another black lesbian in Columbus. And I moved to Washington, D.C., which at that time was known as being Chocolate City. And I figured that I might somewhere find at least 2. And so I moved with my children to Columbus, and we, in 73, and then in 74, I read in the newspaper that 11 women had been ordained in the Episcopal Church, and I had had an opportunity when I was in high school and was dating the drum major of the marching band to attend church with him, and he was Episcopalian. And for a Baptist to become attracted to the Episcopal Church was unheard of. But certainly by 1974, I still resonated. Originally, my attraction to the Episcopal Church was the Smells and Bells. And then in 1974, it became the Smells, Bells, and Dykes. So I feel very honored to be sitting here with Carter, one of those 11. What I did not know at the time was that the Episcopal Church that was my neighborhood church in suburban DC was also one of the churches that was fighting hard against the ordination of women, St. Luke's. And And so I knew that I could not make my home in the Episcopal Church, and I knew I wasn't going to try to make my home in the National Baptist Church. But I found MCC and joined MCC in 1976 in Washington, D.C. There were about 100 members of the church, and 5 of us were Black. And one of the life lessons that I learned at that stage was that in order to be part of the lesbian community, that I had to let go of being Black. Because you could not, there was no solidarity. There was no recognition. There was a little respect, but not a lot. And certainly not enough to sustain one who is a single mother, who is working class, who is informally educated, and who has aspirations of becoming more than what I was at 25, 28. So after 2 years in MCC, I found some other Black, gay, and lesbian people. And together we formed the National Coalition of Black Lesbians and Gays, which was the first national organization for LGBT people of color in the country, and I believe in the world. And there was a moment in the very first March on Washington for gay lesbian rights, and that's all that we had consciousness of at that time. We had organized a conference, NCBLG had organized a conference for people of color at the Heyward University campus at the hotel there. And the March on Washington was on a Sunday. And they held up the march as the conference marched from Heyward University to downtown DC, with this huge banner, naming our conference, naming our organization, and I was able to walk beside Audre Lorde as we approached all of the white people who said, "We cannot begin until you get here." And then I was able to be Black and lesbian in that community, but I wasn't able to be Christian because the church was not our friend. Most of us had come out of traditional Black church experiences, and when we came out of the Black church experience and the Black church. And so I like to say now that by 1980, all of my pieces had come apart. There was nowhere that I knew where I could be all of me. And so like every good lesbian, mid-30s, poor, with children, I met this guy, came out to him, and we were married 6 weeks later, with him promising to care for me until I was again able to care for myself. I was so broken, I didn't know you didn't make those kinds of deals. And so I did. We had another child together. That's how I have 4 children. And 4 years later, somehow I found myself and all of my pieces and told him, his name is Otis, I said, "I'm ready, I'm back." And he said, "How can I help you?" And I said, "I want to I have to go. So I moved to Philadelphia. He loaded the truck, drove it, unpacked it, set up my house, and we remained very good friends until the day he died. But when I came back the very first, I drove from Cincinnati to Columbus and from Cincinnati to Philadelphia on a Sunday. And the first place that I went was to MCC. And it turns out that the day that I came home again, there was a meeting of the Clergy Credentials and Concerns Committee that was hosted at MCC Philadelphia. And for me, when I walked into that room, the members of the Clergy Credentials and Concerns Committee were all people who I had met as I was falling apart in the 70s. And the room, it was standing room only, and the CCCC members were standing around the room. And as I walked in, it was as though I had walked into the cloud of witnesses that had been waiting for me and had called me home. I was ordained in MCC in 1988. I was elected to the Board of Elders in 1993. And in our system, elders are, at that time, elders were selected by the people of MCC to be our spiritual leaders. And I was elected to that role, and I continue to be an elder in MCC. And throughout each of the places that I have been, and each of the things that I have done, it has felt, and sometimes was, that I was either the first and sometimes the only, certainly Black woman, to do the things that I have done and still do. And it is a lonely road. It is a road where there are times that you are revered and times that you are reviled. There are times that you are able to speak your truth and have it believed, and times when you're able to speak your truth and have it denied. And still I stand, and will continue to stand, showing up in all of who I am, speaking the truth of my understanding, and being willing to pay the price of not being believed. My passion now is holding myself and other leaders to accountability so that we can finally learn, all of us, in all of the organizations in which we're involved, in all of the ways that we live our lives, we can learn how to live and lead with integrity.
The cord won't stretch anymore. It's the problem about being the youngest, right? My name is Deborah Peavy, and I'm on this panel, I think, because I was the first out gay or self-avowed practicing homosexuals, which is what we were called, in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in 1981. And I was the only out person in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ for 15 years. And I came to the Christian Church Disciples of Christ because when I went to the University of California at Berkeley, they sent me an optional religious preference card, and I wrote Christian on it. Because unlike my stepfather, I was not a Jew. And so I said, oh, okay, I guess I'm Christian. And they sent it to University Christian Church in Berkeley. Just think, 1971, most freshmen at Berkeley were not going to church. They were not saying, wow, I get to go to church now. I'd always had a hunger for God. I'd always had a hunger to know what held at the center of our common humanity. And I didn't have a better name for it than God. And I read a book in college that said if you helped people know God, you could make the world a better place. And I said, I could do that. And then I graduated from college, and a year later I came out. I'd been an almost professional volleyball player for 15 years, so you know I'd spent a lot of time with a lot of lesbians. But I was not plugged in to who I was in any kind of way. And the church was a refuge for me, and I fell in love with the minister's daughter. And I really fell hard. And she was going to seminary, so I said, you know, I was supposed to help people know God, so I'm going to go too. And at Berkeley, I got a degree in political science because I've always been about power relationships. And so I went to seminary out as a lesbian in 1977. And there were a few ahead of us, thanks be to God, Loie Powell and Stacy and some other folk. But they kind of moved on, and so we were the new lesbians. There were 4 of us, and luckily we're all still good friends. But I just couldn't lie, and the polity of the Christian Church's Disciples of Christ supported my ability to not lie in order to be ordained. I was lucky that way. And so I served in ministry out, and I helped to found the movement along with Jackie Foster, who I saw back right over there, in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And I just figured out that how are we going to figure out how to tell the truth? And that's still one of my passions. And I want to just say briefly that the only person on this panel that I knew before I had the 2 of you that I really knew, I knew of Carter Heyward because her books, when I was a new parish minister, kept me alive. In the beginning was the relationship, began her doctoral dissertation. And I was like, she's onto something. She is onto something. And Darlene Garner, whose presence as a spiritual leader so transcended her role in Metropolitan Community Church. And I want to say that the book that I read, because then, you know, we were alone. Did you hear that theme going here? We were each one by ourselves, somewhere, nowhere by each other. And I read a book by a woman named Judy Grahn, who is still alive. And she wrote this book called Another Mother Tongue. And in that book, she talks about why do we know that the color purple is associated with us, but we don't know why, but we all know that, right? Why are we associated with the rainbow? We all know we are, but we don't know why, right? Well, Judy Grahn wrote a book to answer all those questions. I really commend it to you. Because what it did for me in that moment, and this is the thing that I'm really passionate about still, is that I went from being a random numerical anomaly to becoming part of a people. We are a people. We have a culture. We are the shamans and the priests and the people who cross between boundaries and borders and reach out to find our people. We are a people who are born into the diaspora. We are not born among our own kind. And what do? We go in search to find each other. And when we are going in search to find each other, we build bridges and we change domains and we change. And we are the founding mothers, and we stand on the shoulders of other people too. We're going to hear a little bit about them tomorrow. But we are the founding mothers of what transness means. Because Darlene crossed into white spaces looking for a place to call home. And Erin, a reluctant activist, wanted her daughter to have insurance, and so thought that she could just kind of privately come out as a transgender woman in the Presbyterian Church. Yeah. We were insane, but we were faithful. And that's why we're up here, because we were crazy for what we believed in. And they called us uppity women, and every single one of us had to learn to own that. Because that was the worst thing you could possibly be, because it was just that far from being a lesbian. My own mother, who took me at the age of 12 to become a founding member of NOW in Southern California, when I came out to her, said, "You have to drop out of NOW because all of you lesbians are really ruining it for the rest of us." Yeah. So, we're here because we said no. And then we found our sacred no, and then we said yes. And we kept saying yes, and we kept saying yes. And we didn't know what we were doing, but we kept saying yes. And we're still saying yes, and we're here as part of this panel because we want to say to you all, we're not done saying yes. We know we didn't do it all right. But we definitely did it the best we could when you were just one little voice out in the wilderness. And there are a lot more of us in this room who were those one single voices. And we're all honored to be with each other, and we're very mindful of the other women and how big the room would need to be, how big the convention would need to be to really hold that power of women that said no, and I will die finding my yes. And that's why we're here. So thank you for being with us. Thank you. All right, because we've maybe not stayed to our 5 minutes precisely, being uppity women and all, we did talk amongst ourselves about some of the other things that we want to talk about. And so, Jan, I want to go right to you and have you tell us some of those chants that you were talking to me about yesterday, okay? You don't have to sing them, just give us the titles, because the titles will make us even more electric than we currently are.
This is the students' favorite chant at the Take Back the Night March to stop violence against women. We're women, we're here, we're fabulous, don't with us, we're women. Okay, so I've adapted it. We're women, we're old, we're fabulous, don't mess with us. We're women, we're old, we're fabulous, don't mess with us. No. And yeah, I think we'll just...
Is that good? All right. Okay. All right. We couldn't have lived without our chants. Carter, could you just give us something from the deep interior of your magnificent heart and tell us about where that doctoral dissertation came from?
Put that way, I can do it. First of all, I was fortunate to land at the Union Theological Seminary in the 1960s and was surrounded by extraordinarily wonderful, talented, courageous sister and brother students and faculty. And I was encouraged by my own advisors to do something that I really wanted to do and not to have to sort of draw within the lines. And I had been troubled, I think since childhood, but certainly since my mid-teen years, by the damage that had been done to humanity, and I would learn more and more to all creation, by Christian dogma and by Christians believing they were acting in the name of God. Oppressing each other, killing each other, destroying the land, and using the name of Jesus in this way. And I thought, this is not it. This is not what I'm looking for. This is not my yes. And my advisors, I should name them. Beverly Harrison was one at the time. Tom Driver was one at the time. Dorothea Zola was one at the time. James Cone. It was a stunning group of people and Robert McAfee Brown, God rest him. These people were encouraging me to go for it. So I did. I mean, that's what that dissertation was about, in which I wrestled with the person of Jesus as a human brother who was Godding, a term that I didn't coin that term. Others like Virginia Ramey Mollenkott and before us, Paul Tillich and Mary Daly were using God as a verb as well. But Jesus was Godding. And by that I mean through Jesus' life and the stories we got, we could see something of God, of what God is doing among us all. And that was fundamental to that thesis. And as the foil to this, I needed an example of evil being done by humanity, and I had been reading the books of Elie Wiesel. And so I took the Holocaust as this image of evil, radical evil, either done by Christians in some cases or with Christian complicity and silence in many cases. And so I wrestled with that silence and with that evil and with that hatred being done in the name of Jesus, and with the acquiescence of Christians. And I tried to wrestle a creative theology to resist that. And so the creative theology I tried to articulate in The Redemption of God was theology of mutual relation, or of the calling one another into being. That when something is radically mutual, we all benefit. We don't all get the same benefits because we're all different, but we all do benefit. And unless we all do benefit, it is not of God. It is not good. It is not right. And unless the Jesus story is a story of mutuality with his sisters and brothers and with us, it is not the right Jesus. That's where that came from.
I just want you to know that the people, members and friends of Finley Street Christian Church, were not quite prepared for you when I preached what you just said. They were like, Godding? We knew we shouldn't have called a woman. That's the other thing about me. I was the first woman in my region to have a church of her own in 1981. It's not that long ago, but it's like 1 billion years ago. So Aaron also wanted to talk to us, and Darlene are going to be our last two in this conversation among us, and then we're going to open it up to you. You heard Aaron say that she never thought she'd sit on this panel, so tell us why. Tell us why.
Well, for most of my life, I was ashamed of who I really was. And so it was hard for me to embrace. And so I couldn't let other people embrace me. And you know, to bring up sort of a painful subject, it's still kind of a problem because I know that among the community of women, the trans women is still a contested category. You know, and that even among supportive and loving and life-giving groups like this, that there are people who struggle. And you know, I want to say that's a bad thing, but it isn't.
Amen.
It is not a bad thing. It is a thing that we need to face. It's where I was for 35 years of my life, and I didn't think I belonged. And I think, you know, in a way, the whole issue of gender is what sort of looms over the horizon for all of us in the coming years, both as a society and as church.
We're going to talk maybe just a little bit more about the racism that continues to plague us. If you have any experience with that, you could share. She needed a laugh, believe me.
world has racism? What?
I know why the cage bird sings. It's coming to my mind right this second. Yeah.
You know, I think I felt pain when you said you had to give up being black. That stabbed me in my heart. It's like, how can you give up being who you are? It's like, and I understood that you had to do that, but it just hurt. So.
Thank you for saying that and helping me to have a starting place. It has never been easy to be black in America. And it is no easier for me at age 69 than it was at 9 months. When my friends and I began the National Coalition of Black Lesbians and Gays in 1976, we did that in response to the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force having arranged a meeting at the White House with representative of the president, and it did not include one black person in that delegation. And the word was, oh, we didn't know who to ask. So we started this organization out of Billy Jones' living room in Columbia, Maryland at the time, and proclaimed ourselves national. We lived in DC, Baltimore, and Columbia, We wrote letters to the editor of Ebony magazine because they had made a homophobic, there was a homophobic article. We wrote a letter, national coalition. And what we did, we didn't consciously, I don't think we had conscious awareness of this, but we were claiming and naming who we are, but not just for ourselves, but for all of us. Because in the black community, part of our community value is that there is no me without we. And so there's nothing that we do that is just for us. It is about the collective whole. And so claiming ourselves as national in response to the exclusion from the task force, and then rendering silent the voices of people of color who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender in such a historic moment enraged us. And so we did what we did. I've been in leadership roles within MCC, which is a wonderful denomination that helped to give me life. And it is also one of the most painful places that I have had to live. And a lot of the pain, not all of it, but a lot of it has been because I am a black woman who does not know how to stay in her place. And I I claim my places everywhere. In spite of the constant presence of some manifestation of racism. I think was it you told me it was Robin Henderson Espinosa who said, race, it's always about race. And certainly my experience in all parts of my life, including my church life, is that it is always about race. And as we're, shortly after the 2008 election of Barack Obama to be the President of the United States, I preached at a church in Indianapolis. And at that, in that sermon, I talked about how troubling it was to hear people say that now that we have Obama in the White House and Oprah on TV, we are post-racist. And I preached about that, and then in the fellowship hour afterwards, there was this wonderful little buffet dinner, potluck dinner, and I was sat at a table of Republicans. Gay, white, Republican men who, after saying some not very nice things to me, picked up their plates and left me alone at the table. In church. In post-racial church. Yeah. So racism is everywhere. And the work that all of us need to do to dismantle and destroy the seeds of racism. It's different for people of African descent than it is for people of Latino descent, than it is for people of Asian descent, than it is for people of European descent. We all have work to do, including acknowledging the ways that we have colluded to put in place and cement in place the system called racism.
There was a song when we were in seminary, oh, there's something about the women, something about the women. Oh, there's something about the women in my life. These women are in our lives. Y'all, and I'm just beyond honored to even be counted among these women, but I am one of these women too, and there's something about the women. For the church, which has been so, what was that word you tried to teach me today? Kyriarchical. We're going to learn new words. That's one of my commitments. I want to be educated. Kyriarchical is bigger than patriarchal because it's wider than that, right? So, okay, now before you all ask us any questions, I just want to show of hands about how many of you have questions for us to see how we're going to manage the question thing. Just raise your hand if you have a question, because if there's just a handful of you, we'll just have you pop up and ask away, and I'm going to repeat it, and you can direct it to whoever you want. Okay, go. Right there, in the back.
Thank you. I wonder if you could, any of you, or all of you, in referencing some of your significant courage stories, help us think about whether there's any kind of meaningful distinction between our collective growing pains and the pain of oppressive environments, which we always to name and confront, perhaps with a different kind of energy. So if you could just think about growing pains and things that a justice-minded people might want to eliminate.
Who would like that? Who wants that beautiful, tiny little nugget of truth right there?
Aaron's up for it.
Aaron, are you up for it? Repeat the question as you know, so it's on the video.
The difference between the pain of oppression and growing pains and what they're like. Are you asking how to distinguish between them or the differences? I mean, it's clear to me that the difference between the two is that growing pains are ones that we need to be feeling and encouraging, and the pain of oppression is what we need to be addressing and diminishing. I'm not sure at the moment how we do that. I think, I think one of the ways is to continue to be honest with each other. I think that's, we cannot be afraid of the pain of growth. I think, the questions that we have about trans inclusion, just to throw one out there that's random, are good questions. They're ones we need to talk about. They're not ones that we need to avoid. One of the discomforts that I have in gatherings like this is that it feels like a place where we can't talk about those things because it's impolitic, right? It's not sensitive or whatever. And I don't know a transgender person who can't talk about it. And those are growing pains. Those are things we need to address. The pain of oppression is what we always need to be confronting.
I want to add one thing to that. I would categorize your question in a way through a Sweet Honey in the Rock song about, I didn't say it was good times, I said it was good news, and that the first kind of pain you were talking about is good news. We have to feel it because we have to learn how to heal ourselves. And we never heal all alone. We only heal in community. And that's good news, and we got to own that, and we got to take responsibility for healing ourselves more, because hurt people hurt people. And someone said to me, Michael Adie gave us this quote from Judy Shepard about, there is no worse hurt than church hurt. And I hear you're talking about in the church, those two kinds of pain and oppression intersect so profoundly. So the beginning is it's an inside job. And we got to heal so we don't keep perpetrating oppression on other people who are different than we are. That's what I would say. We had somebody else over here, and then I'll come to you. Please.
Hi, my name is Jane. I'm a first year at seminary right now, looking to delve into feminist theology, women's liberation theology. And one of the things that has been very present in my mind is that as I go into this, sometime I'm going to get assigned to Mary Daly. And
This is really hard.
for people in the audience who might not immediately connect that, one of the most explicit things she said about trans people was that, and I believe this is an exact quote, that transsexual science cannot create women, it can create feminized persons. And I guess the question that I'm personally struggling with is, how do I engage with a sub-discipline whose foundations were in many ways built on excluding people like me?
Okay, we were talking about this very thing yesterday when we had our little luncheon meetings, so both of us at least, and maybe others as well, will say a little bit to this. I was talking about back in the 80s, there were two of us teaching theology for a while in the Boston Theological Institute, myself and Mary Daly. And at the time, Mary Daly referred to women like me as fembots. That obviously meaning women who thought of ourselves as feminists, but she perceived us to be robots because we were still connected to the church. And I didn't much like that. And neither did most of my students, although many of my students were going over to Boston College to take the church in this, not the church in the second sex, Beyond God the Father, and other courses like that from Mary Daly, and really loved what she was doing in them. So it was a little complicated. But I tried very hard to be as relational as possible, both with Mary and with Mary's ideas. But for decades, she and I, and it culminated around a trans issue when a trans woman wound up in a class of mine because she had been kicked out of Mary Daly's class. And the class, both Mary Daly had been teaching at Boston College and I had been teaching at the Episcopal Divinity School, was for women, because it was dealing with women's experiences and women's stories as a foundation for feminist theology. Now, we were not saying it's the only foundation for feminist theology, but using women's lives as a foundation. So anyhow, this woman had been kicked out of Mary Daly's class, and so she arrived in my class, and I told her, of course, she was welcome, and then gave her the syllabus and whatever, and it turned out she was very difficult. And we was laughing about this yesterday because she was a recently transitioned male to female trans person, and I don't think that's the language that was being used in the early or mid-'80s, but that's what I now would refer to her as. But she still acted like a very abrasive male lawyer, and because that had been what he had been, a male lawyer, a trial lawyer prior to transitioning. And he took over every class. She took over the classes unless I stepped in, and I got quite tired of that after a couple of weeks, and so I talked to her and said, you know, you've got to stop this. You've got to stop behaving like this. And she was saying it's because people don't accept me as trans, and I was saying, no, it's because you're being obnoxious. And so there was a lot of lessons for me in this as a teacher and in terms of pedagogy, and we were talking about that, about how we say to other women, you're being obnoxious. How we say to people of color, you're being obnoxious. How we say to trans people, you're being obnoxious, whatever. And because it takes a kind of personal courage to do that. And I think if you're a student, you're of course in a particular power relation with whoever's teaching your classes. But I think as much honesty as you can bring to discussions and to the text, and to, let me just say about Mary Daly that she contributed a huge amount to feminist theology. Much of it very positive. Many of us might not even be here had we not read the early Mary Daly. And she was also obnoxious when it came to trans people. Just plain obnoxious, and she was wrong, in my opinion. She was dead wrong about that.
Although there's a way in which she was right about that too. I think, you know, and I'm not a Mary Daly fan either. I've been studying. I've been in feminist studies at Georgia State University, and it's a hard topic. Oh my gosh, it's really difficult. But you know, there is a sense in which you cannot feminize a person. A person is either a feminine person or not. I'm who I am, or I'm someone else, and I can't be someone else, so I must be who I am. And therefore a surgeon or a psychologist can't turn me into something that I'm not. It's not, you know, it's sort of the old idea that, you know, you could take any man off the street and send him to Denmark for the weekend, and he would come back as a feminine woman. And we know intuitively that just doesn't work. And, you know, the fact is, in many ways, some people go through gender transition but don't. And you know, one of my most painful experiences was as I was a feminist as a man. I taught feminist theology classes back in the 1970s, and there was a day when I moved my professional office from where I practiced as a man to where I practiced as a woman. So I moved from one office to the other, And this new office had a parking garage with elevators that came up to the lobby, and then you had to walk across the lobby to the elevator to go to the tower to get to the office. And so I started doing that, and I almost immediately started running into men. I would crash into men in the middle of the lobby. I mean, just walking, just smash right into them. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. My therapist suggested that maybe that I really was attracted to men, and I said, I don't think so. But one day I was watching, and I was eating lunch out in front of the building, and I was watching how the men and women were navigating, and I realized that men and women in open public spaces navigate differently. Men go in straight lines. They go from where they are to where they're going, which tends to be somewhat masculine, I think. And women tend to take, sometimes they make it look like they're window shopping and doing other things, but they're actually giving right-of-way to the men. And this was a huge dilemma for me. It was just terrible because, as a feminist, I did not, I wanted to be a woman, but I did not want to do that. And it was sort of like, oh my gosh. And the bewildering part was, it was several months later that I was kind of reviewing my notes, and I realized that I had been trained by the world to walk like a woman.
Which is a wonderful segue to 1 minute's worth of what I want to say to you, beautiful human being that you are. Everything that has to do with, I would say, Christianity is embedded with a soul sickness that we all have to work in our own ways to do a lot of translating with and reject. I call it metabolizing. We bring it in and we chew it, and some of it's just shit and we have to let it go, and some of it becomes the nourishment for our becoming. And Mary Daly's part of what you metabolize, because you look at her context as a near Holocaust survivor Jew in a man's world that did not welcome her, like probably forever one day. And we call it horizontal violence, right? When we can't change it at the top, we take it out on each other. And every single one of us gay men have taken it out on lesbians, lesbians have taken it out on transgender people take it out on all the various ways of categorizing y'all do within the trans community about trans masculine, trans feminine, right? It's because we don't heal ourselves from the inside out first. So let Mary Daly be a mirror to you about how not to do good public theology around an issue that is as hard for you to come to terms with as that was for her. That's what I would say to you. That's a good thing in theology school to wrestle with, I'd say.
Great question.
Yeah, great, beautiful question. Thank you. Yes, I think we do.
Silly story, and I've always been trying to...
Come up here if you're going to tell us a story so it's recorded for posterity. You belong up here, you slut. You tell them what that is so they know I'm not actually just calling you a slut. Not that that would be, like that.
Well,
okay, good.
The first organization I started was Sluts, which was seminary lesbians under theological...
Speak into it. Yeah, get up closer.
Seminary lesbians under theological stress. That was in the late 80s, early 90s. But what I was thinking about being really intentional as an LGBT leader in our movement around being clear that we are on the shoulders of the feminist community and the civil rights community, and acknowledging that all the time. And at the same time, I'm also honored to be part of a group of LGBT national executive directors and leaders. And we kind of joke among ourselves that we are often approached by leaders of many other movements saying, how did you guys get so far so fast, right, within the LGBT community? And you're thinking, really? And you guys are so together, And we're like, because we know, the sausage making that's going on behind the scenes. But it is true that we have come a long way, and I think your reference to now, I mean, when you look at women's organizations today, I mean, my question for the panelists, is there hope? Is there a hopefulness or organizations that are bringing feminists together that are, thriving today? And are there ways that we can help move those movements forward? Carter. Freda.
Wow. I was given 5 minutes to talk, and I thought it was firm. But later today, I do not know where or how, but I'm going to do my narrative poem, Dear Dora, Dangerous Derek Dieseldike. So you're all invited, and I just... What? No, it's on the schedule, but I... as an uppity woman, have been very restrained, and I took my 5 minutes, but I will get a time in Dear Dora, Dangerous Derek Dieseldike, which is a very lesbian, feminist, activist poem.
Are we ready to leave? If so, I'd encourage us to sing a song, if you can cope.
We're not quite ready, but we'll come right back to you, Jan. We have a couple more minutes. And
I would, let me just say, Celeste, first of all, hello, and I share that question. I don't know, quite frankly, from whence comes our hope at this moment as feminists in this society. I think we need to look globally. I think we absolutely need to be intersectional about this, so that we absolutely need to be black and brown and Asian and white, gay, lesbian, straight, trans, men and women together in this, to find and to build this movement. The location that I happen to be working in myself right now in the mountains of Western North Carolina is the NAACP, where I am bonded with some women and men, black and white and Latino, who share these passionate feminist and anti-racist and anti-classist and anti-Citizens United and other kinds of intersectional issues. And we are working hard in our little part of the world, but we're all asking this question, and we are furious about what keeps happening to women, and the whole litany of oppression. But as I said, we have to keep women of all colors and cultures and classes in the center, not alone, but not let our voices be marginalized and much less disappeared.
how about you? Where's the feminist hope? Mary Hunt and Diane New, you're part of the feminist hope in this world.
Oh, yes, for sure. Each other, I think that's one of the places.
Yeah, so y'all, is feminist theology even part of seminary anymore? I don't know, it's been a long time. Yes? Aren't some seminaries and not?
Oh, I thought we had solved that. We've solved race and feminism, right? I thought that was... That's right. Yeah.
Okay, wait, we have one more question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Beth. I was just going to say, this brings up such a great question, I think. So one of the questions I've been mulling around in my head is, for those of you, and there are so many of you on this panel that are truth tellers, and I think the question for me is, in terms of longevity, the discernment around when and where to tell the truth and when to keep one's mouth shut, for me, is a very hard discernment. And I piss people off all the time. And so a tiny example of that, which just connects to what was being said, is everybody has let go of inclusive language. Yes. We are the Presbytery of Chicago, and I cannot tell you, in the Presbytery of Chicago, we go to these meetings, and the language is horrendous. And I feel like all over, and a lot of women clergy colleagues who have also just let go of the language piece. And I feel like we sort of push it and push it and push it. And I feel every now and then this temptation to just ease off and let go and quit making an issue about this word and this word. and including words now that we know about race, like darkness and things that have been painted as and so where do we keep the focus and where do we just shut up?
Freda, why would you answer that? Where do we keep the focus and when do we shut up? You've been doing it for quite a while.
We never shut up. I mean, it takes guts to leave the ruts, and you know, you've got to speak up. You've got to speak up, and when you're most afraid, when you feel the most threatened, when you feel that they don't want to hear it, that's the time that you've got to speak up.
You can decide.
Let's stand up. And before you leave, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all.
And yes, because this is related to Halloween, sing along if you know it. Who are the witches? Where do they come from? Maybe your great-great-grandmother was one. Witches are wise, wise women, they say. There's a little witch in every woman today. Okay. Who are the witches? Where do they come from? Maybe your great-great-grandmother was one. Witches are wise, wise women, they say. There's a little witch in every woman today.